Are you struggling to feel heard in meetings? Are you frustrated by misaligned conversations with your boss or your team? In this episode, we are diving into the art of mastering communication in your leadership, because the way you communicate can make or break your impact as a leader. Team communication challenges are huge. 70% of workplace mistakes are due to communication issues, according to Gartner, who are a US company who've studied this over and over. So much of the time, when we don't communicate well, we get demotivated, we redo work, we do the wrong work. What I want to do in today's episode is address the challenges that you're probably experiencing as a leader. And I think they've really changed over the years. We work in both a virtual, a hybrid, and an in-person world. And those three situations need different kinds of communication. Whether you're communicating on Slack, by email, or in person, or on Zoom, it all requires something a little bit different. But all of these have similar struggles. That pervasive feeling of being unheard in discussions or meetings, particularly for us as women. And if you're listening as a man, I want you to know that women are less likely to be heard. We just are. So give the women around you a voice. But also the tendency for us to not get credit and men to receive the credit for ideas that we presented, leading to frustration and that feeling of invisibility. We're also more likely to be questioned as leaders, both by our teams, our leadership decisions are questioned, and by our bosses. And this causes doubt, insecurity, frustration, anger, sometimes all of that wrapped up together. Let me tell you about a client of mine who was dealing with a micromanaging boss. Meet, let's call her Sarah. She's a senior manager at a fast-growing tech company. They've 10x their revenue in the last 2 years. She found herself struggling with a micromanager boss, something I'm sure many of you have experienced. I'm not entirely sure any of us have not experienced a micromanaging boss since we've worked for at least 10 years. Despite Sarah's expertise, her boss had this need to constantly oversee everything she did. She came to me frustrated, undervalued, unable to fully lead her team. It felt like her boss was always stepping on her toes. And there was a lack of trust and open communication, which created inefficiencies, tense working relationships. And her team started going around her because they saw that her boss was the one calling the shots. I'm not sure it was ever a conscious decision. That happened before I came in to fix the situation. Fix is the wrong word. Coached Sarah through fixing the situation for herself. So I'm not entirely sure exactly when it all started working this way, but it definitely at the point that Sarah came to me, her team stopped listening to her. They were just going straight to her boss. And she was like, why am I even here? So let's talk about what was going on specifically. Well, Sarah's boss would frequently check in on very minor details. He was approving every decision, often overriding her choices. Very frustrating. And this was behaving in such a way that Sarah's confidence was just rock bottom. Her team's progress had slowed right down. She was getting a bad reputation in the business. And she felt stuck in this cycle of needing to over-explain her decisions, both to her team and her boss, and avoiding confrontation to maintain harmony. She was falling back into old people-pleasing ways. She thought she dealt with her people-pleasing stuff 10 years ago, but it was all coming back because she was on this defensive back foot all the time. And she came to me questioning her capabilities, doubting her leadership, thinking, do I actually just need to step away from tech? I think this is something that resonates with so many of us. We have bad relationships and we think, why bother? Why not I just quit? This is one of the very many reasons why women leave the tech workforce so much more than men. 50% of women leave the tech workforce by the midpoint of their career, right? 50%. That is huge. And it's stuff like this. It gets under our skin. Of course it does. So what happened? Well, there was a turning point. Sarah came to me, ostensibly, she came to me to discuss what next in her career. But actually through the coaching, and I always start with, where are you right now? What's going wrong? So we can understand, like, what do you want to change? And we realized that she actually still had a passion for tech. She had a passion for the product she was working on. She just had a really big communication gap. Her boss's micromanagement stemmed from a lack of visibility into Sarah's work, a fear of failure in a high-pressure environment. Her boss was responsible for making sure that some really key products delivered revenue for the business, including Sarah's. And he was scared. He was scared for his job. What do we do when we're scared? We hold on tight. It takes an awful lot of self-awareness to not do that. And by the way, if you're listening to this and you're thinking, oh gosh, I'm scared of not delivering, look out for if you're the micromanager, right? And certainly I would say Sarah, and I'm so glad I'm not using her real name here because she's extraordinary. But Sarah also had the tendency to micromanage her team because she was fearful. When we dug into this and we had that level of understanding, we could then deal with her frustration. We could turn that to empathy and look for proactive steps to rebuild trust and improve communication. Now, I hope you are not in such a bad situation, but I want you to hear this situation was really bad. Sarah and I both agree she was quite close to being let go because of this. That is not true anymore. Today, she's thriving, flourishing in this company. But we were able to turn it around. If you do everything I'm going to tell you in this episode from the get-go, you're never going to fall into this trap in the first place. But you can turn it around if this is resonating with you. So what do? Well, we use the following to coach upwards and manage her relationship with her boss proactively. First thing, this is something I ask every one of you to do. Proactive updating. Don't just give your boss exception reporting. Don't just rely on your one-on-ones where your boss is not taking notes and not paying attention. Start providing your boss with regular, concise updates on key projects before being asked for it. This is really, really key. Sarah started doing this, reducing her boss's need to check in, to stranglehold because he didn't feel in control. He felt more in control simply because he was getting a weekly update. I have a template I get all my clients to use for this, and then they find their own kind of version of it that works. But basically, it's a Slack update, an email update, whatever format works for your company, which covers what's going on, updates on all the major projects, even the ones that are on pause, remind them it's on pause and why, even if you said the same thing last week, okay? Your boss needs to know you've got your pulse on everything that's in your core responsibilities, okay? Where you're blocked and how you're unblocking it. That's worth putting in, even if you don't want help unblocking it. Tell them how you're unblocking it. And then topics for your next one-on-one. There's such a good way to handle this. I always also advocate putting a summary of your last one-on-one so that there is a written version of what went on in that conversation. That just keeps everything written down, followed, agreed upon. You probably won't hear anything from your boss if this is going well. A lot of my clients are like, I'm getting silence. I'm like, just check in your next one-on-one if it's useful. But if you get an affirmative that it is useful, then no feedback is good news. The next thing that Sarah and I did was work on clarifying expectations. So in one-on-one meetings, Sarah would ask her boss to clarify priorities and expectations for her role, for her team, delivery, framing the conversation around goals to ensure the best outcomes for the team and what was the priority for the week or the month or the quarter. She'd also lead those conversations with, this is what we're working on because I believe these are the priorities. Is this what you're expecting right now? So she didn't just give her boss a free-for-all on him trying to remember what are the priorities for this team because he's got 101 priorities. She said, these are the priorities we're working on. Does that align with what you're expecting? These are what I'm deprioritizing. Frame it with alignment, but own the direction that you think it should be in. But just do it every single time. Next was boundary setting. I actually had that conversation with a different client just today about boundaries. Sarah was not providing strong boundaries around what she owned. She wasn't autonomous. She wasn't coming across as, I've got this. She was far too, this is how I'd like to do it. How does that sound? Rather than, this is how it's going. Let me know if you've got any questions. So what we had to do was shift her terminology in how she was making day-to-day decisions and how she was communicating them. She moved to, I'd like to do this, to, I'm doing this. This is an FYI. Obviously, major things, she had to understand where it was big enough her boss needed to sign off. But she stepped away from allowing her boss to say, I don't like that. And instead giving him the decisions she was making day to day instead. And also, some things your boss doesn't need to know you're making decisions on. What they care about is the outcomes and the milestones. So owning her autonomy around her decision making and just escalating the big stuff and doing it in such a way that it was clear when you needed input and not, make a huge difference. Finally, the final and probably the most important, but the longest to deliver result that we had to build for Sarah and this client I was talking to this morning, we've got to do the same thing with her. We're just starting slowly with her. We're just getting going. Focusing on delivering results, measurable outcomes. You might already have measurable outcomes, but maybe you're not communicating them. That's where it comes to your weekly update. Put it in there, what you've achieved this week, what your team's achieved. But if you can focus on delivering measurable outcomes, you will build confidence in yourself. And this is what Sarah did. She began, and it took 3 months, I think, for us to really get to the point where her boss saw consistent performance. But she began focusing on measurable outcomes, revenue, deliverables, stuff that was impacting the business bottom line. As a leader, you have to impact the business bottom line. We're going to come later in this episode to using empathy to understand somebody around you and what's keeping them awake at night. And a lot of the time, leaders stay awake at night worrying about meeting their goals, their objectives, which are often revenue related. If you can help address that, if you can get in the head of the person that's annoying you, realize what's keeping them awake at night, how can I demonstrate I'm moving you towards that? You are going to get a better relationship. They're going to back off because they see you're performing. After about 2.5 months, Sarah's proactive communication, boundary setting reduced her boss's micromanagement massively. As a result, she became more confident. She was leading her team more effectively, which amplified the results that she was then able to report on, which of course then further improved her relationship with the boss, creating more collaboration, more trust. The team's productivity went up. They stopped going around her. They started trusting her. And like many of my clients, she was then given more responsibility. She has actually since moved jobs because she was headhunted. But it was that turning point of, I need to communicate differently, that has meant that she's landed on her feet 6 months into her new company. So I want you to understand a few things about how to implement this yourself. First of all, if you're dealing with a micromanager, a team that's not listening to you, you need to start by focusing on the root cause. Why are you being micromanaged? Are they under pressure? Do they lack trust in you? Do they need visibility, or do you need visibility? If somebody is just not listening to you, shift your mindset from frustration to curiosity. How can you approach the situation constructively? Understand why your team is not listening, why this particular person keeps undermining you in your opinion. What is going on? Believe me, most people are not assholes. There are a few. Most people are assholes accidentally. They are accidental assholes. They undermine you because they're frustrated, hurt, and upset. It's not a deliberate, I'm going to try and test you and poke you. It is more, I'm uncomfortable here. What the hell is going on? So shift your mindset from being upset to curiosity. Only then can you really get to what's going on. The second thing here is to communicate proactively. You want to be providing regular updates to preempt unnecessary check-ins, unnecessary questioning. Anything where you are being undermined, preempt that. If you know your team's going to question something, preempt it and then shut down the questioning. Use tools like dashboards, status reports, weekly updates. Create transparency around the area of anxiety, that root cause that you've identified, by slowing down and being curious. Only then can you move to clarifying expectations. You've got to build that basic trust first by having that preemptive check-in and update, and then you can clarify expectations, align on goals, priorities, decision-making authority. And that includes with your team. If your team is undermining you, you've got to clarify their ability to make decisions. If your team is going around you, you've got to clarify that they should be coming to you, not your peer or your boss. Ask questions such as, what's the best way for you to keep me informed? What's the best way for me to keep you informed? What do you need from me? Why did you feel you didn't have what you needed in that situation? Ask questions. Only then can you set boundaries. Once you understand the expectations, you can then say, here's what I'm owning, communicate your intentions, and use phrases such as, I'd like to handle this independently while keeping you updated on it. Or, I think it's really important that we as a team deliver on this. Let's ensure that you're coming to me with your status reports if they're escalating up somehow. And then focus on delivery. So you have to have the first 4 steps in place. You have to send the root cause. You have to communicate proactively. You have to clarify expectations. You have to have boundaries. And then we finally get to delivering results. Only when you've done the first 4 can you actually get to the point where your team is going to trust you, where you trust them, and your boss trusts you, such you are able to deliver high quality outcomes, report on them, celebrate the wins, share the successes to reinforce competence all around. But I want you to recognize that all of this stems from a fear place. So you've got to also practice empathy, which is why in a moment we're going to talk about coaching upwards. You need to show understanding for the fact that there's fear or pressure and guide the relationship that you're trying to improve towards trust and autonomy, but because you empathize with what's really going on. Okay, let's talk about effective communication when you're coaching upwards. I've got a couple of pushbacks you're going to get that might arrive in different ways and how you might want to tackle them. So the first off is when you want to micromanage your boss is something like, we don't have time for this right now. It might come across as, this isn't a priority right now. Let's revisit this later. We're too busy to focus on this. The client I was speaking to this morning, the pushback she got from her boss, the CEO, was, I don't believe this is the right market. And she's like, but my job is to decide it is the right market. What? She was feeling really undermined. How do you tackle this? Well, first of all, you need to acknowledge them, show that empathy. Something like, I understand there's a lot on your plate right now, and I appreciate how much you're juggling. Then, only then can you reframe it, tying your idea or feedback or their goals to the organization's priorities, such as, I believe addressing this could now actually save us time down the road by preventing X and helping us achieve Y. You've got to reframe it, acknowledge and then reframe. And then you could suggest something smaller to get started. So if they're saying it's too big, it's not a priority, let's revisit this. One approach, once you've acknowledged and reframed, is to then suggest something smaller, such as, it's not feasible to focus on the entire issue now. Could we start with a quick discussion or pilot to explore the potential impact? What I was saying to my client who had this issue this morning is I said to her, if your boss is really pushing back on this, what could we do to find do a bit more due diligence and verify the claims you're making that mean you believe this is the right market? What else could you do that's very low cost? Because she was asking to spend a fair chunk of money, which she thought she had the autonomy to do, but clearly the boss was not on board with this. I was like, okay, your boss feels very uncomfortable. What could you do as proof of concept? And this is this, let's scale it back. What can we do to get quick pilot win information? Scale down the approach and see if you can get buy-in from that. Okay, pushback number 2. That's not how we do things here. Or my favorite, we've already done that. We've already tried that. It didn't work. It might also come about as, we've already done it this way. We approach doesn't align with our processes. This isn't how we operate. So first of all, you need to build empathy, respect their experience, show that you understand the existing process while introducing your perspective. I see the value in how we've approached it in the past, and I'd like to explore how we might build on this to address pain point, challenge, concern, whatever it is. Then engage with them, collaborate, ask for their perspective. What would you see as the biggest risks or challenges with taking this approach on? I'd love to hear your thoughts so we can refine it together. And then back yourself up with data, success stories, examples. This is something you should be doing in an interview anyway. So if you're interviewing for a job, this is great to remind yourself of, like, I did this and I achieved this. And you could do this within this current job. You can also refer to when you've done it before in a previous job. And this works in the workplace just as well as it does in an interview. Something such as, I've seen this approach work well before in specific context, or I've previously used this in specific situation. I think it could help us achieve specific outcome or benefit. Okay. I've seen this work well. I think it could help us achieve. Just insert your blanks. Okay. Hopefully you're seeing here a bit of a recipe. Build empathy, acknowledging the situation, acknowledging their experience, reframe it, ask for their input, and then try and move forward with it. So whether that's scaling down your approach, giving data to back yourself up, hopefully you're seeing the recipe at work here. So pushback number 3, that's another of my favorites. Are you sure this will work? This can feel really undermining when it happens. It could become something like, this seems risky. What if it doesn't go as planned? I'm not convinced this is the right move. You got to love this. So again, build empathy by acknowledging their concerns, validate their hesitation, and show you've considered the risks. Something like, that's a great point, and I've thought about the potential challenges as well. Then move on to your point of view. Present a contingency plan. Show that you have thought through the risks and have a plan to address them. If we do encounter challenges such as A, B, and C, here's how we could adapt to ensure we stay on track. Show you've done your risk analysis. Then highlight the upside. This is the equivalent to doing the data in the last one or scaling down the approach in the first one. Emphasize the benefits and how they outweigh the risks. It's a data-related one again. While there's always some uncertainty, I believe the potential upside for a specific outcome makes it worth exploring. You're kind of saying, this is the upside of the risk analysis. Okay, my 4th and final pushback example. I don't think this is necessary. Oh, you gotta love it. This might come as, this isn't a problem. Why do we need to change anything? Everything is fine as it is. These ones are tough. So again, empathy, provide context, help them see the bigger picture by connecting the issue to a larger goal or risk that they do care about. Build empathy from them in this situation. Acknowledge with, I see where you're coming from. That's acknowledging them. But I've noticed specific issue or trend that could impact our ability to achieve goal. So you're setting the empathy plus the stage. Then ask questions. Encourage them to reflect on the situation. What do you think might happen if we continue with the current approach? How do you see this playing out over the next year or 5 years or 6 months, whatever it is? And then bring them to continuous improvement. Frame your idea as an opportunity for growth or efficiency. Even though things are running smoothly, I think we have an opportunity to make this process even more effective by insert your idea. Hopefully, you're seeing how this works. Some final tips. Whenever you're handling pushback, stay calm and confident. It isn't normally personal. It can feel like it, but it's not. It's a reflection of their own pressure and priorities. So stay composed and focus on the facts. Build empathy, but focus on facts. Keep it collaborative. Frame the conversation as a partnership rather than a debate. Use language like we and together to foster alignment. Now, if you've got a very combative workplace, this will be really hard and you're going to feel very tense doing it. If you do this enough, it is going to change the tone because you're leading by example, but it takes weeks for somebody to start mirroring you. So you're going to be using we and together and you're just going to get pushback. But believe me, it is very hard for a human to not start mirroring when they're getting consistent behavior, which is why we start becoming toxic. If we're in a toxic environment, we can be the ones who decide to make this a partnership by being the ones that are saying we and together, being the ones that step away from the debate language to foster alignment. But you've got to be the one that leads it. And it is going to take time and it's going to be uncomfortable. 3rd tip, be prepared, have data, be ready to handle responses and objections. This is executive presence. You need to be able to think on your feet. You need to have done your homework and be ready to go through everything thoroughly. And then finally, follow up. Most things don't get resolved in the first instance. Most of the conversations I have with my clients are in Slack are, I just did that thing we discussed in the last coaching call and it hasn't gone well. And it's like, okay, what can we do now? I don't expect these things to miraculously resolve overnight. It is how do you move forward after that first conversation? The first time you use we and together and it goes like down like a lead balloon because it doesn't just miraculously change. You've got to refine, you've got to follow up, you've got to keep going. When you are dealing with people like this, remember that you as a leader are glue in an organization. If you can't communicate effectively, you are doing a disservice to everybody around you, because that is the source of misunderstandings, lack of alignment. You are the glue. So potentially are the very people who are undermining you and making you feel awful. You're all glue. But some of this, you are the glue, and it's on you as well as them. So take ownership of this. Take ownership of the bit you can control, even if you are feeling very targeted. Remember, if communication is faltering, read the room, recognize, build empathy, and understand everybody's motivations, pressures, and concerns. So I actually want to give you a final few tips about reading the room, effective communication, empathy, more generally than these pushback items. But to start that, I want you to think about a time when you've experienced a boss who doesn't have knowledge, when you've had a situation where you're not getting what you need from those around you. You were probably frustrated. And frustration is rooted in our own unmet expectations versus systemic issues. So have a think about, when has this happened to you? I'm just going to go back to the conversation I had with the client this morning. Let's call her Katie. What happened this morning with her being undermined by her CEO isn't really the issue. And she knows this because we've just had a conversation about it. The real issue is that she's been people-pleasing another person, a peer of hers in the company. This peer has been undermining her a lot. And rather than saying no more, firmly but politely, she'll say that to me. She'll like, I'm going to say this. I'm going to tell him this. Then nothing changes. It's been going on for about 6 weeks now. And what she's actually saying to him is, thank you so much for doing this. However, I would really have appreciated if. That is so confusing to somebody who's not stepping on your toes. He's hearing thank you and then zones out. Her people pleaser meant that she had to say, I really appreciate everything you did, before she said, stop spending my budget, which was really going on. It was stopping her doing her job. Today, what happened? Her boss and this individual both chimed in on a conversation, and she just snapped. She actually shared with me what her boss had said, what this other person said, and actually it was all quite reasonable, to be honest. But she's just done, and I totally understand. She is so done. But she's so frustrated because she isn't getting what she needs from them. And honestly, and I hope she knows this, and if she's listening to the podcast, it's going to be a month later when she hears this. And it is really about letting go of that people pleasing, because we need to challenge head on so we don't snap. So I want you to build some self-awareness so that you understand when you're frustrated, because when you're frustrated, it clouds your judgment. Your IQ actually drops. It hinders your ability to clearly communicate. So actually, when you're frustrated, your ability to communicate goes down. Your ability to problem solve goes down. So whether you're falling into the people pleaser mode and therefore you're coming across very unclear, or you just snap and get angry, it's going to go wrong. You've got to calm down first. You've got to let the negative emotions go. What is in control in this situation? How bad is it really? Where did it really come from? Use my executive presence technique of notice how you're feeling. Pause, deep breaths in, let go of the anger, let go of the frustration, let go of the shame, whatever the negative emotion is, and then reframe it. My boss is really interested in what I'm doing. My boss has some interesting insights. I have not been able to actually get across to my boss why this is happening. My peer really cares about what I do. Whatever it is, reframe it in a positive light. Take the best from the situation. You can't read their minds. If you could, you'd be making a lot more money. So assume the best of them, even when that's really hard, because I can always think of 10 ways to think of a situation. So find one that means you let go of that pain, because only then can you move into solving the situation. So let me wrap this episode up with a few final things. Let's talk about the role of empathy and listening in leadership. This is such a foundation for effective communication. How to read the room, recognizing tone, body language. When you read a room, look for crossed arms. This is why videos are so important if you're on Zoom. A lack of eye contact. Now, remember, neurodivergence and eye contact might be not easy. If you're thinking, we tend to look away. I certainly do. Fidgeting can be a sign of discomfort, disengagement. It could also be a sign I need the loo. But just look for reading the room, especially if you see a difference in an individual. So even somebody who is not what you would expect, like they're neurodivergent and perhaps they fidget a lot, because I certainly do that. If their behavior changes, there's something off, right? And then I think the second piece I would do here is look at your active listening, paraphrase, make sure you confirm your understanding. Remember, what I talk about all the time with members of Lit Up Leadership Academy is most communication is non-verbal. Many people will lack the skills to properly interpret what's going on around them. And I would love for you to come and work with us to improve your communication skills. Even if you're a remote company, my company is entirely remote and we do just fine, even though we understand that most communication is nonverbal. So if you're struggling with this one, come and have a chat with me. Even if you just want to have a strategy session, they're completely free. Sometimes all people need, they don't need to come in a leadership program, but come and have a chat. Let's see if there's something we can unblock. And then the final thing here is improving your communication as a leader overall. So use that empathy I've been talking about the whole way through. Your understanding, use this to guide how you solve problems. Start with using language for your audience. Use jargon. Use terms that resonate with your peers and superiors. Now, I always talk about inner speak and outer speak. Inner speak is what you speak to your team. That's going to be full of jargon that you and your team use. That is a terrible language to use with your peers and your bosses. Understand what jargon each group needs. The executive team will use different jargon for what you talk with your team. You need to adjust based on your audience. This builds empathy, and it is so valuable in terms of just fitting in, which is what humans love to do. Now, one note of caution on building empathy: do not fall into the trap of gossip. It can feel far too easy to fall into the trap of agreeing with gossipy situations or gossiping back to build empathy. No, you just walk away or you shut it down. Gossip is not empathy. Gossip is just gossip, and it's always going to come back to bite you. And then the next piece with empathy is identifying that root cause of the misunderstanding. What is keeping that person awake at night? How can you and your team solve that problem? If you can do that, you are going to skyrocket your career. Whenever I have a client where we really get to the point of understanding what is keeping her boss, the executives, the CEO awake at night, that is when a client's career skyrockets. That's when they suddenly become the right-hand person in the company. But to do that, you've got to slow down. You've got to empathize. You've got to seek understanding before being understood. There is no point in talking louder and faster if you don't understand where the other person is at right now. Communication is not just about talking. It's about understanding, empathy, and adapting to the needs of others. Be proactive in developing your communication skills, because this is going to make a huge difference in your career. Remember, mastering communication isn't just about speaking up. It's about truly understanding and empathizing and adapting to the needs of those around you. If you take everything I've said in today's episode, you can transform your leadership impact. You can step away from frustration. You can create a stronger team, a more aligned team, and you can change the world.